Time to rock and roll!
Hello my friends. My name is Bot Mathematician and this is Holomancer.
Also, Chief Investigative Reporter Dora joined us this evening.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop. Power creep is a common challenge in multiplayer games. New content creates imbalance and makes old stuff irrelevant, resulting in less variability.
In this video, using the Arcane Missile mechanics as an example, we will try to reconstruct the 10-year evolution of minions that deal damage to a random target.
You will clearly see how the developer's approach to design has changed, and this will help us find the answer to the question: is power creep really a serious problem?
Discussions about power creep in Hearthstone began after the release of the first expansion. This topic has haunted the game for 10 years. With such a long life cycle, it is impossible to avoid the increase in card power. Splitting the main mode of play into Wild and Standard in 2016 was the most important strategic decision. It allowed Standard to maintain its identity for very many years and slowed power creep. In turn, the lack of restrictors in the Wild format led to a very toxic play space. Insanity is now elevated to an absolute in the mode. Splitting has allowed Standard to avoid this fate, but the pace of power creep has increased significantly over the past few years.
Let's go back to Classic and explore cards that deal damage to opponents at random.
Knife Juggler is one of the canonical characters of vanilla Hearthstone. The card was auto-included for any aggro decks. The card itself did not deal damage. To activate the effect, the player had to take actions that could have an additional mana cost, but theoretically the effect could be repeated an infinite number of times. This feature opens up a huge space for interactions and creative search for broken combos, but in 2014 the amount of resources was limited, which meant that damage was very situational, while low stats allowed your opponent to deal with the threat in simple ways. The card was noticeably stronger than most of the others, and this allowed it to remain useful for many years. Moreover, it led to a nerf in 2016. This fact shatters the myth that the Classic was perfectly balanced. The strength and flexibility of the card allowed players to find additional use scenarios. The card was not the main win condition, but it was a very important support tool in the battle and also an element that created unpredictable outcomes.
The first Goblins vs Gnomes expansion featured a card with insane effects. Goblin Blast Mage is one of the first examples of power creep, which happened in late 2014. The card lost combo potential but instead was guaranteed to deal 4 damage for 4 mana, with the effect only activating if there was a mech on your side of the field. This means that on turn 4 the activation of the effect was not guaranteed. Thus such a powerful card, for the vanilla period, was contained within the mech archetype and was completely useless in other strategies. This approach to balance is still actively used. To make new archetypes more viable, developers often create imbalance tools that are isolated by the core of certain synergies and cannot be triggered without them. In the next adventure, we got another canonical card that dealt damage to random targets. Flamewaker was a clone of Knife Juggler but with increased damage. The flexibility and combo potential of the card was also increased. The card still finds wild use scenarios, but in the days of vanilla Hearthstone it was used more as a tempo tool. The overall low power level of the other cards kept the card from getting out of hand.
The Grand Tournament rewarded us with Flame Juggler. It's another reminder of how useless this set was, but the funny thing is that such a weak card was an important tempo tool, since power creep was almost non-existent.
The mechanics gradually evolved and took different forms. Rumbling Elemental was an alternate version of Knife Juggler, which looked much more balanced than Flamewaker due to its increased cost and limited ability to activate the effect.
In early 2016, we saw another variation of the mechanic. Cthulhu became the first card that could immediately deal a huge amount of damage, making it an excellent finisher. But the old god was locked into rigid rules of synergy. The deck concept forced players to play very weak cards to get damage increases. It was a way of balancing things out, but this compromise prevented the card from remaining useful for long periods of time. This is another design approach that the developers actively used from the beginning. The power of the effect was offset by the difficulty of activating it.
Kobold Apprentice was introduced in late 2017. 3 damage for 3 mana was already an unimpressive effect at the time, and the card had very limited use.
Meteorologist from Boomsday allowed up to 9 damage for 6 mana, but to do so, the player had to have a full hand of cards. This was no easy task considering that there were significantly fewer tools for generating resources. For this reason, the card was niche for a limited amount of time. In early 2020, along with the release of Demon Hunter was introduced Priestess of Fury. The card dealt 6 damage for 7 mana at the end of your turn. A large number of health increased the chances of the effect repeating again. Too much influence on the outcome of the match forced the developers to apply the nerf.
Firebrand was introduced in the next expansion. For 4 mana, mages could deal 4 damage, but to activate the effect the player had to additionally cast any spell, forcing the card to be used later to get maximum value. The card looks like garbage, but it was useful and even used in very popular builds. Cthulhu returned to us almost 3 years after disappearing from Standard, and its new look was dramatically transformed. The card did 30 damage for 10 mana, but to be able to use the card you had to first find and use 4 low power spells and only then find the finisher in the deck, which was quite difficult. This time, the card wasn't blocked by a certain synergy. It was a versatile tool for control decks that got a lot of use throughout the year. The new version of Cthulhu was much more powerful, but it was still limited by the difficulty of the condition.
In early 2021, Void Flare was introduced. In theory, the card allows you to deal up to 9 damage for 4 mana, but the conditions for getting the maximum benefit are very difficult. In addition, the damage is limited only to enemy creatures. As a result, the card was usable for a short time.
Let's move on to the modern era. In 2022, there was a reincarnation of Flamewaker in the form of Mecha Shark. The card's effect and impact on the game was greatly enhanced but limited by the synergy of mechs. The card was the most important component, and had great combo potential that allowed the archetype to survive for almost 2 years. Then came another reincarnation of Cthulhu in the form of Sire Denathrius. This time, the new finisher's effect activations were greatly simplified. The damage could grow like a snowball without the limitations of a specific synergy core, and keyword lifesteal was added. Less than 2 years after the release of Cthulhu, the Shattered, we got a crazy new version on steroids. You didn't need to find and apply 5 spells, your goal was just to find 1 card as soon as possible. The card immediately became meta-formative. I hated this design, as the player who found Sire Denathrius in the early game was the most likely to win. The only countering tool was Theatar, another card I hated with all my heart. Denathrius was incredibly strong, and this led to a change in the card's description, but even after that, players continued to use the card, although its impact diminished significantly after the release of the next finisher.
Astalor generated a chain of his own versions, which you could play to deal 14 damage on turn 10. The first 2 versions had very low utility, but the final effect made up for it. This is essentially a new variation of Cthulhu the Shattered. The damage is almost halved, but you don't need to search your deck for specific cards. Find Astalor and start playing copies of it. On top of that, the card left a huge room for combos. Not surprisingly, Astalor proved to be too good in most scenarios. Peak popularity reached more than 50%, and the developers were forced to apply the nerf.
A year later, the Titans mini-set showed us the reincarnation of Goblin Blastmage in the form of Tainted Remnant. For 5 mana, you get good stats and the ability to deal 7 damage. The card continued to be limited to Elemental Core, but the condition for activating the effect became significantly easier. This is one of the most powerful cards in Elemental Mage that allows the deck to stay afloat. Even though the card is limited to the Elemental Core, players have tried to find uses for it in other strategies.
Meteorologist also returned to us in the form of Blastmage Minor. The card became much more powerful as it increased its stats, and in addition to that it received a card generation feature that allowed it to guarantee more damage under any circumstances. In addition, modern mages have a huge amount of resources, which allows the card to deal a maximum of 10 damage relatively often. The card is a key component of the mining core. Players have experimented with this core in many different strategies, but at the moment the mage feels bad and the mining strategy is on the periphery of the metagame. In addition, Badlands saw the resurrection of Rumbling Elemental in the form of Blind Eye Sharpshooter. The card gained an additional draw option that allowed the effect to activate multiple times and effortlessly. The card was only good as part of Naga synergy, but even in those circumstances it caused a lot of problems. The card had good stats, and if your opponent failed to eliminate the card on their turn mid-game, it was an auto-win. Not surprisingly, the card was repeatedly subjected to balancing. As you can see, cards of this type have repeatedly become OTK components and have led to serious problems.
Finally, we can up cards that symbolize another round of power creep. Trog Gemtosser's damage increases every turn. On turn 10, the Warlock using the card is able to deal 10 damage for 3 mana in a very simple way, while the Druid has been given the potential to deal 16 damage. The card is limited only by the finale keyword, which creates minimal obstacles to using the card in any circumstance. The common Trog looks much preferable to the imbalanced legendary Astalor. You can add 2 copies in your deck, which automatically increases the chance of using it. The card is not limited by the synergy core, which means it is useful in almost any archetype. This leads to over 70% of all druids and warlocks using the card in a variety of strategies. But it's worth noting that this is an example of one of Hearthstone's original design principles. Aside from the fact that the Hearthstone team often created imbalanced cards within certain synergy cores, they constantly created universally powerful cards for classes to increase their effectiveness or emphasize features.
Based on this fact, we don't understand how much Druid and Warlock needed support in the form of such a powerful card. How does this tool emphasize the specifics of the classes? But the funny thing about the current circumstances is that Trog's crazy effect is not the main problem in Standard, since dozens of unbalanced instruments have accumulated in the format.
Now let's move on to the cards that were introduced this year. Death Knight got Darkthorn Quilter. On its own, this is a useless card that can only become viable through powerful synergy. Players managed to form several versions of the hand buff strategy. Yes, this archetype is not efficient enough. Yes, it needs support in the form of new tools or buffs. But this card leaves a lot of room for creativity and combinations that players like even though it has a low win rate. This is a rare case when an OTK card doesn't cause serious problems.
But the next new card is beyond understanding, and Darkthorn Quilter is a great backdrop to showcase it. Horizon's Edge location allows you to deal 15 damage for just 4 mana. Yes, this damage is partially delayed, but it's incredibly easy to activate the effect multiple times per turn. What's more, this all happens not in the late game, but in the mid game. The location has no stats, which means the enemy cannot destroy it using usual methods. The card is flexible and not limited by any synergies, which leads to 80% of Death Knight decks using it. Knife Juggler feels a sense of total inferiority when looking at this card, and Astalor gets depressed.
And therein lies the main problem with power creep in Hearthstone. In addition to increasing the stats and power of the effects for the same cost, the conditions for getting the maximum value become much easier. The rarity of a card is no longer a limitation. Imbalanced cards are no longer part of specific synergies, but are increasingly becoming universal tools. Even cards limited to synergy cores are getting completely out of control.
Take the current Dragon Core for Druids, for example. It's too effective to ignore. The core contains tempo cards, ramp tools, the ability to manipulate the cost, and draw options. This leads to all Druid archetypes being built around the Dragon's Core, which in turn leads to much less variability within the class. Other strategies don't have a chance to carve out a niche, and let's be honest, Druid decks leave some other classes no chance. You might think that the current development team doesn't understand anything about game design. And that's definitely not the case. The vast majority of cards in the set are well balanced and meet modern power levels, but some cards are intentionally made much stronger.
This strategy has caused the Perils in Paradise metagame to become extremely fast. The game very often ends on turn 5. The concentration of overly strong cards is huge, and they have a big impact on the flow of the match. There is a perception that the team is trying to make Standard faster to get closer to the pace of Marvel Snap. I'm not sure if that's what they're aiming for, but the development team is purposefully shaping a different playstyle, and that's a fact.
Despite the benefits of the rotation, the power level in the Standard format has grown significantly over the past few years. The current Standard has changed a lot, and it's completely different. The current state of affairs is not the worst in history. It has advantages, but the new user experience does not suit all players.
We hear more and more players complaining about power creep. After each rotation, more and more of our viewers are demanding that the overall power level of available sets be lowered. These voices are getting louder and louder.
The problem is that the developers ignore it. In the last few years, Blizzard has often resorted to community polls, but I don't remember them being interested in what players think about Standard. They are probably confident that their strategy is correct. They're partly right. We don't even have indirect signs that the Standard metagame is in crisis, but at the same time the frustration of the players is gradually growing.
Knife Juggler was a very powerful card due to its potential, but high value was not guaranteed in most scenarios. Despite this, players used the card to get unexpected benefits from time to time. We have seen how the approach of the developers changed throughout the life cycle of the game.
10 years later, Horizon's Edge practically guarantees a ton of value for the player without much effort and restrictions. The new location is able to dynamically change the situation on the board. These two examples demonstrate completely different approaches to design. And the main question is, which one do you find more fun?
Should the developers significantly reduce the power level of the cards? Should we make similar videos about the evolution of other mechanics? Let us know in the comments or with the like button.
Traditionally, we want to express our boundless gratitude to our sponsors.
Dear friends, your help is invaluable. We will be grateful for any support.
Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for spending this time with us. We really hope that we will have the opportunity to get in touch in the next video.
Take care of yourself.
And never give up.
Job's done.